Very good evening to everyone, and welcome to the webinar one of series of webinars hosted by Faculty of Dental Sciences, University of Peradeniya, Sri Lanka. I'm Dr. Sumudhu Madhavela, attached to Faculty of Dental Sciences. Without a lengthy start, let me introduce the speaker tonight. Today, we have Professor Ruwan Duminda Jayasinghe with us, and he will be talking to us on the topic Understanding Leukoplakia. Professor Ruwan Jayasinghe needs no introduction to the Sri Lanka dental fraternity, but as a formality, let me briefly introduce Professor Ruwan Jayasinghe as the academic chair of Department of Oral Medicine and Periodontology of Faculty of Dental Sciences, and he's a board certified specialist in oral and maxillofacial surgery. He has been in the Faculty of Dental Sciences as an academic since year 2001 and held many academic and administrative positions in the faculty. He made his valuable contribution to numerous academic forums nationally and internationally, and received multiple awards, including presidential awards for scientific publications. He has co-authored many texts, including books, chapters, and more than 75 national and international full paper publications. His research interest is on oral potentially malignant lesions and oral cancer. Without taking much of your time, let me invite Professor Ruwan Jayasinghe to deliver his presentation. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sumudhu, for those kind words of introduction. Is it on now?
Yes, yes. I can see your screen now. Can we have it in the presentation mode, sir?
Yes, please.
Yes, yeah.
Okay, I'm very sorry
sir.
for the confusion, and thank you, Sumudhu, for those kind words of introduction and organizing this, because the technical side is handled by you. And first of all, I have to say a few things before I go into the topic. Number one, this is a new experience for most of us, including myself. So therefore, there may be a little bit of a technical hiccups here and there. And if there is any, please pardon with us. Number two, during this presentation, what we are trying to do is basically to give you a glimpse of leukoplakia, what it is. And more than anything else, I would like to discuss the difficulties that we are facing in our clinical setup in relation to the leukoplakia. So as we know, the leukoplakia is part of the oral potentially malignant disorders. Oral cancer is a major problem in our part of the world. In Sri Lanka, it is the #1 cancer among Sri Lankan males. And in this part of the world, most of the oral cancers start from oral potentially malignant disorder. And when it comes to the risk factors for oral potentially malignant disorders, including the leukoplakia, there's a little bit of a confusion. There are many studies, many investigations on the risk factors for oral cancer, which has been identified as well-known, well-established risk factors, as well as some emerging controversial, as well as possible speculative risk factors. But when it comes to the OPMD, these risk factors, etiological factors are not very clear. But we consider both for the oral cancer and OPMD, the etiological factors to be the same. Identification as well as the modification of these risk factors are very important because it can help us in minimizing the cancer risk. So these are the risk factors I'm sure all of you know. In our part of the world, tobacco or the betel quid chewing and smoking, they are the most important risk factors when it comes to the OPMDs. So these are some pictures of what we see in our day-to-day life. The traditional betel quid, areca nut, they are very much in abundance. Wherever we go, we see them, and they are the main culprits in getting the OPMDs as well as the oral cancers. So these are the smokeless tobacco products, which is getting popular, unfortunately, nowadays over the traditional betel quid. These are commercially prepared tobacco products as well as some areca nut products, and especially among the urban populations and especially among the younger group, these are getting more and more popular. In addition to that, the smoking is there, as well as the alcohol. So these are the main etiological factors behind the OPMD and oral cancer. So the OPMD, there are different types of OPMDs, leukoplakias, erythroplakias, oral submucous fibrosis. These three are the most important oral potentially malignant disorders because they have a high risk of malignant transformation potential, especially the erythroplakia. So today, my discussion will be mainly focusing on the leukoplakia. Later on, we will discuss the other oral potentially malignant disorders as well. Oral leukoplakia. If you go to the literature, there's a discussion as well as a confusion on the definition and terminology of the oral leukoplakia, as well as some leukoplakia-like lesions, so what we call as leukoplakic lesions. And most of these definitions, the terminology, we are mainly focusing on the clinical aspects, but we cannot just consider the clinical aspects only because it's partly related to the histopathological aspects as well. There are certain lesions which comes under the oral leukoplakia or which resembles oral leukoplakia, but there's a confusion whether we must include them or exclude them from the oral leukoplakia. For example, alveolar ridge keratosis or frictional keratosis. We will discuss these things later. So if you go by the historical changes in the definitions, in 1978, the WHO defined the oral leukoplakia as a white patch or plaque that cannot be characterized clinically or pathologically as any other definable disease. Whether there is epithelial dysplasia or not was not considered in this definition. In 1997, the definition was changed into any other definable disease, and that was replaced by any other definable lesion because they believe it to be in one particular place, but there was no justification provided for this change. In 2002, they recommend to make a distinction between a provisional clinical diagnosis of oral leukoplakia from a definitive one. So the certainty factor was introduced at this point, and I will tell you what the certainty factor later on. In 2005, again it was changed. A white plaque of questionable risk having excluded other known diseases or disorders that carry no increased risk for cancer. And at that point, it was decided to consider oral leukoplakia as a potentially malignant disease and not a lesion, since it was well known that the cancer development may not always happen in the leukoplakia, as well as sometimes you get the cancer in a different area, not from the area where you have the leukoplakia. In 2007, WHO Collaborating Center for Oral Cancer and Pre-Cancer in the United Kingdom, they define it as white plaques of questionable risk having excluded other known diseases or disorders that carry no increased risk of cancer. And the changes in the definition did not stop at that point, and there are different people coming up with different definition from time to time. For example, in 2017, from India, they have suggested another definition, and you can see how lengthy the definition is. So the people try to cover up different aspects in these definitions, and this change from starting from 1978 up to 2020 tells us how difficult it is for us to come up with a single definition or the terminology. So in simple, it's not a single entity. There are different types with difficulties in identification clinically as well as histopathologically. Whenever we are discussing the oral leukoplakia, we have to consider the anatomical site in the oral cavity, etiological agents, whether it is tobacco-related, ericanat-related, or whether it is idiopathic leukoplakia, as well as the size of the lesion and number of lesions. The diagnosis of oral leukoplakia will depend on the clinico-pathological exclusions. So in simple terms, there are no specific identifiable factors which will help us in identifying the leukoplakia. So what we have to do is to exclude known clinical pathological conditions, and whatever remains will be the leukoplakia. So as I mentioned earlier, the term leukoplakia can be used at different levels of certainty, which we call as C factor. And C1 and C2 are for clinical, C3 and C4 are histopathological. So the C1 is the first level where we are talking about the provisional clinical diagnosis, which will happen at the first visit. Then we go to the C2 for the definitive clinical diagnosis, that by elimination of suspected etiological factors during a follow-up period of 2 to 4 weeks. Clinical features alone is not good enough for us to diagnose the leukoplakia. So therefore, we have to go for histopathological diagnosis. And in C3, where we have a provisional histopathological diagnosis, we complemented it by an incisional biopsy. Finally, we have the definitive histopathological diagnosis of C4, where we have excision of the lesion and the examination of the entire lesion under the microscope. And oral leukoplakia, you may see them in anywhere in the oral cavity. There are 3 stages. We have the earliest lesion, early lesion, and advanced lesion. Traditionally, the oral leukoplakia has been divided into 2 clinical types, homogeneous and non-homogeneous. We will discuss these homogeneous and non-homogeneous lesions later on. As I mentioned earlier, the leukoplakia is by exclusion. The diagnosis of leukoplakia is by exclusion. In simple terms, the leukoplakia is a white lesion. Therefore, we have to exclude other possible white lesions that can occur in the oral cavity. There are large number of white lesions you can get in the oral cavity. Some are trauma related. It may be physical trauma, it may be chemical trauma, or it may be thermal trauma, or it may be associated with an infection like candidal infection, viral infection, or it may be physiological, and sometimes it may be associated with various systemic diseases like dermatological problems, and sometimes it is genetically determined. So here in this picture, you can see different types of white lesions that we can see in the oral cavity. So it is very important for us to exclude these cases one by one and then come up with our diagnosis. So the biggest problem with the leukoplakia, some of the leukoplakias may transform into the malignancy. Fortunately, the malignant transformation of leukoplakia is not that great. And different studies gives different values, but generally we believe it to be less than 5%. And you can see the spectrum, the normal mucosa with the etiological agents changing into the leukoplakia. And if you don't intervene at the early stage, it can proceed further and it may develop into erythroleukoplakia. Later on, it will go into erythroplakia and then into oral cancer. So you can see if it is erythroplakia, the malignant transformation potential is over 90%. Whereas for leukoplakia, it is only less than 5%. And in most of the cases, when you look at the lesion, you can see the evidence of leukoplakia together with the erythroplakia or erythroleukoplakia. Now, for example, if you look at the pictures here, you can see in both cases, in first case, it is erythroleukoplakia, where you have a mixture. In the second case, it is erythroplakia, but in the posterior aspect, you can see a larger leukoplakic lesion. Whenever we have a leukoplakia, we have to identify the possible malignant transformation potential. And there are various markers which we can use. Some are clinical, some are histopathological, and newer studies are trying to identify molecular markers as well. So clinically, non-homogeneous types, larger lesions, lesions present in certain anatomical sites like floor of the mouth or in the tongue, female gender, the lesions that has been there for a longer duration, and presence of candida is considered as important, the clinical risk factors for malignant transformation. But in all cases, the relative risk of malignant transformation potential has to be determined by the presence of epithelial dysplasia under the histopathological examination. So the question comes, are we going to do a biopsy for each and every leukoplakia. If the leukoplakic lesion is small, are we going to do the biopsy? Or if it is large only, are we going to do the biopsy? But whether the lesion is small or not, we have to consider all other possible risk factors in deciding the possibility of malignant transformation potential. At one point, the people thought in order to call it as a leukoplakia, the lesion has to be more than 4 millimeters in size. But now that the people don't believe in that, you can have even a smaller leukoplakias, which even can transform into a malignancy. So this is malignant transformation, and you can see the both lesion, one lesion is in the tongue. You can see a larger leukoplakic lesion, which has transformed into the malignancy. The second lesion is present in the floor of the mouth and the ventral surface of the tongue. Again, that has transformed into a malignancy. Now we'll come to the different terms that we are using in relation to the leukoplakia. We talk about homogeneous leukoplakia, non-homogeneous leukoplakia, speckled leukoplakia, candidal leukoplakia, verrucous leukoplakia, proliferative leukoplakia, hairy leukoplakia. So you can see it's not just one word. There are so many words. Are they the one and the same, or are they different? And in addition to that, we have the vericopapular lesions, which includes different types of lesions starting from verrucous leukoplakia, verrucous hyperplasia, verrucous leukoplakia, verrucous carcinoma, and that can confuse with the clinical diagnosis of leukoplakia. Under the microscope, there may be cases with keratosis only, or there may be cases with keratosis plus dysplasia. Then I will come into an interesting area, the vericopapular lesions. There's a lot discussed in this area. Vericopapular lesions, they are lesions which clinically have a vericopapillary appearance. But it's not just one type of lesion. It includes many different types of lesion, and that some are benign, some are malignant. So that is the problem. These vericopapular lesions can come up due to different types of etiological factors. Histologically, vericopapular lesions range from simple hypoplastic lesions to verrucous and even squamous cell carcinomas. And there's an interesting type of vericopapular lesions called exophytic verrucous hyperplasias, which usually we see in people who are having oral submucous fibrosis. These lesions, they look malignant clinically, but when you look at them under the microscope, there's no evidence of invasion, and even the level of dysplasia you see in those lesions is very minimal. There are different criteria that you can use to identify these exophytic verrucous hyperplasias from verrucous carcinomas and other type of verrucous lesions. There are different clinical types, and they can occur in any anatomical site. They are basically solitary lesions. They may present in the people who are having oral submucous fibrosis, and they can mimic oral cancer clinically. And you can have keratin plugged into the vericopapillary processes under the microscope. So this is one study, one case series that we have reported. I'm sure some of the authors must be listening to me right now. So these are some of the clinical lesions. When you look at them, you can see the lesions they doesn't look like a simple leukoplakic lesions. They are much more than that. But when you do the biopsy, the multiple biopsies, one biopsy after the other, there's not much of a dysplasia to start with. And there's a tendency for us to do more and more biopsies, and in certain situations to go for the excision. And even in the excisions, it's difficult to see any invasion or even the severe epithelial dysplasia for that matter. So these will complicate our life. These are the difficulties that we are going to face in our clinical setup. Then we have verrucous hyperplasia. And how are we going to differentiate verrucous hyperplasia from proliferative verrucous leukoplakia? How are we going to differentiate it from the HPV-induced leukoplakias? How are we going to differentiate them from verrucous carcinomas? Unfortunately, there are no hard and fast rules in differentiating one from the other. Now the lesion present in the gingiva here. So that is a case of proliferative verrucous leukoplakia managed by us. This patient presented to us, and the young patient without having any etiological, non-etiological factor for the development of leukoplakia. We removed the lesion. The patient went home and came back to see that the lesion is the same. And we removed it for the second time with a larger margin, but in 1 week's time, the lesion has reappeared. So we have removed it using the scalpel, we have removed it using the laser, but still the patient is getting the lesion back again. So therefore, the question, are we going to take it out continuously, or are we going to go for the aggressive surgery? When you look at it under the microscope, there's not much of a dysplasia. So therefore, how can we justify the removal of the area together with the teeth in a young patient? So these are the difficulties that we are facing in our clinical practice. Another interesting lesion is proliferative verrucous leukoplakia. Fortunately, it's a rare condition. It begins as a simple, slow-growing, persistent hyperkeratosis, and it can start from one particular point in the oral cavity, and then later on, it can spread all over the mouth. Now, for example, if you see the case that you see in these pictures, this patient developed it from the palate, the mid palate, and now you can see it basically involving the entire mouth. So it is proliferating. Now, in order to identify the proliferative verrucous leukoplakia, you have to identify the proliferation. So therefore, this is not a condition which you can identify, which you can diagnose at one point. And most of the time, the diagnosis of proliferative verrucous leukoplakia is retrospective. That is, when you see either the extensive growth, the proliferation, or when you see a malignant transformation. And these cases are highly resistant to treatment. Whatever the method that we use, they tend to recur. And in addition to that, they have a very high malignant transformation rate. There's a discussion going on between the link between the human papilloma virus and oral leukoplakia, but the evidence to support the causal relationship either between the HPV infection and oral leukoplakia or between the HPV infection and the keratinocytes and the malignant transformation is not very strong yet. We are conducting few studies in relation to this, and we have seen people who are having the oral leukoplakia, they are having the HPV in the lesions. But whether this is leading those lesions for a malignant transformation, we have to wait and see. We have to follow them up. We have to extend our study to see whether there is any association between the malignant transformation and HPV in oral leukoplakia. And now we will come to the leukoplakia-like lesions. This is where the problem is mainly. Now, one example is alveolar ridge keratosis. Alveolar ridge keratosis, we know, is a chronic frictional trauma to the alveolar ridge. Histopathologically, we will see only the hyperkeratosis and we will not see epithelial dysplasia in these cases. And there are suggestions to remove the alveolar ridge keratosis from the oral leukoplakia because there is no dysplasia and there is no possible malignant transformation. But unfortunately, we don't have a properly conducted follow-up studies to say that the malignant transformation is not taking place in these lesions. So therefore, are we going to remove it or not? That is the question to be answered. Now look at these lesions. Now you can see the keratosis in the alveolar ridge. Are they leukoplakias or alveolar ridge keratosis? Now if you look at the photograph in the bottom, now I'm sure the chances of the patient getting the keratosis due to the friction in that particular point is very limited. So therefore, this is alveolar ridge keratosis, but is it only due to the friction or whether it is a leukoplakia? We don't know. So will it be safe for us to remove these cases from oral leukoplakia? Because the moment we remove it, we lose the patient for the follow-up. And these patients may end up with malignant transformation later on. Then we have the chronic hyperplastic candidosis. There are two types. You can have the chronic hyperplastic candidosis, which is due to the candida, as well as the leukoplakia, which is superinfected with candida. And we know in our clinical practice, most of our leukoplakias, they get superinfected with candida. So therefore, how are we going to differentiate one from the other? Clinically, it is not possible. Histopathologically, it is not possible. So the only way for us to do it is by antifungal treatment. So if the lesion disappears within 4 to 8 weeks of good antifungal treatment, there's no justification for us to call it as leukoplakia, because the leukoplakias will not disappear like that. And if the lesion persists, then we can reasonably assume this is candida-associated leukoplakia or leukoplakia superinfected with candida, not primarily chronic hyperplastic candidosis. So this is one example of a chronic hyperplastic candidosis. Unfortunately, most of the patients who are having the chronic hyperplastic candidosis, they have the same etiological factors like for the leukoplakias. Now, for example, if you look at this patient, you can very clearly identify the beetle stains all over the mouth. So therefore, this patient was a beetle chewer as well as a smoker. So those are the risk factors for candida as well. Then we have the frictional lesions, so what we call as frictional keratosis. The term keratosis is not very appropriate unless we have done a biopsy. So these has to be frictional lesions. That's how we have to use it clinically, because the keratosis is a histopathological term unless you have the biopsy. So the frictional lesions, the alveolar keratosis, basically there's some overlap, because the alveolar ridge keratosis is also a type of frictional lesion. Again, the same question arises here. Are we going to include the frictional lesion under the oral leukoplakia, or are we going to take it out? It's very difficult to differentiate one from the other clinically. Just because we have a possible reason to get the friction does not necessarily mean it is a frictional lesion. You can have a leukoplakia, and at the same place you can have a bad tooth or broken tooth restoration. So that there can be both at the same time. So the only way is to take the reason for the friction out and observe the patient for a 2 to 4 weeks time and see whether the lesion disappears. And if the lesion disappears, then we can reasonably assume, okay, there is no problem. Otherwise, we have to consider it as a leukoplakia and we may require a biopsy. Another interesting type, hairy leukoplakia. Now, even though we call it as a leukoplakia, it's a misnomer. But this has been well accepted in the literature. And simply because of that, it's well accepted in the literature due to different reasons, and it's a well-described entity, and it's not a potentially malignant disorder. Clinical aspect is not always hairy, and there's no better term. So therefore, even though this hairy leukoplakia is not a type of leukoplakia, because we know hairy leukoplakia is strongly associated with Epstein-Barr virus infection, and it's completely different type of lesion. But as the term has been there for over a long period of time, and we are very familiar with the term, we use the term hairy leukoplakia. And now the people are coming up with different terms, and the people wants this to be replaced with the term hairy leukoplakia. And there's a discussion going on to have a separate workshop on OPMDs again to clarify these matters and come up with a new set of definitions, the terminology. I'm sure it will happen in the future. There's a little bit of a technical hiccup. Until I sort this out, I have received a question. I would like to answer this question. Okay. Mm. Just give me a second. Sorry for it. Now, in these photographs, you can see uh, the hairy leukoplakias in one of our patients. Then we have the restoration associated lesions, and mostly they are contact lesions associated with amalgam. Okay, one can ask, then we call this amalgam associated oral lichenoid reaction or lichenoid reaction. How can you get these restoration associated lesions into the oral leukoplakias? Yes, I agree. If you are having a good experience, definitely you will identify immediately them as restoration associated lesions or the amalgam associated oral lichenoid reactions. But some people still miss this. Even there are times, even for me, there will be a little bit of a confusion. Now, for example, if you look at these lesions, all these, you agree, they are amalgam associated oral lichenoid reactions. But if you look at the first lesion, now the patient can have a leukoplakia here. And on top of that, there can be amalgam. So we may jump into the conclusion just because there's amalgam, just because the amalgam is in touch with the lesion. So this is an amalgam associated oral lichenoid reaction. So we may take the amalgam out and just ignore the fact we may not follow up the patient. And sometimes the patient is having amalgam restoration, but there is no direct contact with the lesion. So we have to be very careful, and it is very important, even if you diagnose this as amalgam associated oral lichenoid reaction, it is very important for us to see the patient, remove the biopsy, remove the amalgam restoration, or go for the patch test if it is available. Or otherwise, if you remove the amalgam restoration, review the patient to see whether the lesion has disappeared. Otherwise, we have to consider the possibility of oral leukoplakia as well. Then the smoker's lesions were tobacco-associated lesions. Now, a very good example is the smoker's palate. And then we can have the leukodema. So these are smoking-associated lesions. And these lesions, like the smoker's palate as well as the leukodema, there's no malignant transformation potential. So therefore, can we put them together into the same category? No, we can't. So we have to have a clear demarcation between the one and the other. But at the same time, look at this. Now, this patient is having a leukodema, very thick plaque. But at the same time, there's malignancy. You can see a very clear malignancy developing. Now, whether this malignancy is associated with this, no, it is not. But just because the patient is having a leukodema does not necessarily mean the effect of tobacco is not there in the rest of the mouth. So this patient has developed a leukodema physiological lesion in the buccal mucosa associated with the smoking, and another lesion in a different place. So these are the difficulties that we are facing. And this, one may diagnose this as a leukoplakia because it's a very thick plaque. The next part, the homogeneous versus non-homogeneous oral leukoplakia. Now, these homogeneous and non-homogeneous leukoplakias has been identified for a longer period of time. Simple reason for us to divide the homogeneous versus non-homogeneous, because we believe the non-homogeneous leukoplakias are having a high chance of malignant transformation compared to a homogeneous leukoplakia. But again, remember, the exact or actual scientific evidence for this is not very great. There are enough cases where the homogeneous leukoplakias can transform into a malignancy. Now, these are some examples. You can see a very faint white lesions, early lesions, and then it is getting thinner, thicker and thicker, and then it's getting thicker, and then you can see some growing appearing and extensive. So those are the homogeneous lesions. So these are some non-homogeneous lesions. You can see that the differences, it's red and white mixed lesion, or there can be ulcerations within the lesions. Right. Now I'm going to show you 3 pictures, and I want you to decide whether this is a homogeneous leukoplakia or an unhomogeneous leukoplakia. And Sumudhu will help me in conducting a poll.
Of course, yes.
So this is the first photograph. Have a look and tell me whether this is a homogeneous lesion or an unhomogeneous lesion.
So we'll allow a few minutes for them to observe the image, and then
we'll give a few seconds for them to see it and then come up with the diagnosis.
Okay, then I can post a poll. Everyone, please share your answer. Okay, now I'm going to share the poll. Okay, please share your answer. Okay. I'm sharing the results, so I hope you can see the results.
Yes, right. Okay, so now we will move to the second one. Is this a homogeneous or an unhomogeneous lesion?
Okay. So we have majority's answer towards non-homogeneous leukoplakia in this.
Right, okay. So now we will move to the third one.
Okay, let me launch the polling. Okay, let me share the results. Again,
Okay.
we have more participants agreed towards non-homogeneous leukoplakia, sir.
Good. Right. So now I'll show you all 3 together. Now my point is not to tell you this whether this is homogeneous or non-homogeneous. What I want to show is the differences that we are having. I'm sure all of you have seen enough number of cases with leukoplakia, and you have enough clinical experience with you, but there's no agreement. The first, around 60% of the people were saying it is homogeneous, whereas 40% of people were saying it is non-homogeneous. Second, it is the other way around. And the third, about 70% of the people are saying it is non-homogeneous, and 30% of the people are saying it's homogeneous. So when you look at it from your point only, you may think, okay, this is a very straightforward case. What is there to look at? But it's not the case. So these are the difficulties that we are facing with, especially differentiating between the homogeneous and non-homogeneous leukoplakia. This is really important. Now, when it comes to the non-homogeneous leukoplakia, there's a confusion. When you have verrucous type, a lesion which is coming up, popping up, most of the people diagnose them as homogeneous leukoplakias. Simply because when you look at it, the lesion looks clinically homogeneous, and the lesion, even if you feel it, the texture, it will be homogeneous. But any lesion which is having a verrucous appearance, any lesion which is popping up from the mucosa has to be considered as an unhomogeneous leukoplakia, not a homogeneous leukoplakia. When we say homogeneous leukoplakia, it is not only the outer appearance of the lesion, it is not only the texture of the lesion, it increases, it depends on the proliferation as well. And verrucous leukoplakia and verrucous carcinoma, how are we going to differentiate one from the other? There's no definitive criteria for us to differentiate one from the other clinically, and it is very difficult. And sometimes you may consider it as verrucous leukoplakia when the lesion is small. When it is large, you may consider it a verrucous carcinoma. But unless you have the histopathology, it will be very difficult. And another question arises when you say verrucous carcinoma. Do we have invasion? And if there is no invasion, are we going to call it as carcinoma? So the confusion continues. And then the confusion comes with the proliferative verrucous leukoplakia. How are we going to identify them at the as proliferative verrucous leukoplakia? So if the lesions present in the gingiva, are they proliferative verrucous leukoplakia? Are the lesion when it is extensive, is proliferative verrucous leukoplakia? So these are the questions to be answered. So the proliferative verrucous leukoplakia, the diagnosis is not at one point. You have to have a follow-up, and then basically the diagnosis is retrospective. Not only clinically, to get the things complicated more, we have a confusion over the confusion with the histopathology as well. Assessment of epithelial dysplasia, we know there are differences when it comes between the pathologists. There is intra as well as the inter-observer variation. So now, that's why now they want to come up with the binary grading of dysplasia rather than telling it mild, moderate, severe. They continue with that. In addition to that, they will tell us whether this is a low-grade dysplasia or the high-grade dysplasia. And from our point of view, it's much more useful, because what we want to know is to come up with the clinical, clinical decision whether we are going to keep these patients under observation or are we going to go for a surgical intervention. One important point here, whether it is low grade or high grade, whether you treat it with surgery or without surgery, the evidence to say that you are going to get a malignant transformation is not great. Even the smaller ones, even low-grade dysplasias can transform into the malignancy. And high-grade dysplasias, they can go back, they can reverse without any treatment. And whether it is low-grade or high-grade, if you do a surgical excision with a margin, still there can be a recurrence, still there can be a malignant transformation. And sometimes high-grade lesions you don't treat, you just leave it as it is because of other reason, possible medical complication, and there's a possibility of them going back. So these are the real case difficulties that we are facing with. So these are some histopathological slides which I borrowed from one of my colleagues in the pathology department. Lichenoid dysplasia. Now, we don't like the term lichenoid dysplasia any longer. Lichenoid dysplasia is one of the reasons why in early studies, the malignant transformation in oral lichen planus was high. So you can have a leukoplakia and there can be inflammatory reaction in the corium, and the people call it as lichenoid dysplasia. And that was mimicking oral lichen planus to some extent. So therefore, there is a confusion regarding the two, and some of the studies, they have included lichenoid dysplasias into the oral lichen planus, so the malignant transformation went up. So in order to avoid the confusion, now we don't want to use the term. Verrucous hyperplasia versus verrucous carcinoma. So what are the differences? What are the histopathological differences between the verrucous hyperplasia and the verrucous carcinoma? And it is, again, it's very difficult. And if it is a conventional squamous cell carcinoma, we know there will be invasion and the lesion will go into the underlying connective tissues. And the moment we see invasion, we diagnose it as squamous cell carcinoma. Whereas here, there's no invasion. So how can we differentiate one from the other? So these are some lesions. Now, are they verrucous carcinomas or are they verrucous hyperplasias? We don't know. And if you look at the lesion in the lower down, That is not a verrucous leukoplakia or a verrucous carcinoma. It is a viral wart. So I just put the lesion to say sometimes even the viral warts, large viral warts, multiple viral warts can mimic these lesions clinically. So again, say some pictures. So the diagnostic confusion, I'm coming into the last bit of my presentation, then I will answer some of the questions that you have raised. So the diagnostic confusion can happen with the oral leukoplakia versus other white lesions. Oral leukoplakia versus oral cancer coming from the oral leukoplakia as well as early oral cancers. And then with the clinical appearance to do a biopsy or not to do a biopsy. So this is one of the questions that we have to answer. And whenever we are going to do the biopsy, from where we are going to do the biopsy. Now, for example, if you look at this patient, you can see the patient is having multiple lesions. And from where we are going to do a biopsy? Are we going to take one biopsy? Are we going to take multiple biopsies? And are we going to include only one side, or are we going to take it from both sides? So these are the difficult questions that one has to answer. So the challenges that we are facing in relation to the leukoplakia, clinical diagnosis, there are challenges with the histopathological diagnosis. There are challenges with the treatment, which I didn't touch here. And there are challenges with the follow-up. What is the frequency of follow-up? Whether it is 3 months, 6 months, 1 month, and how long we are going to follow up. And on top of that, the challenges in the research. Unfortunately, the research when it comes to the leukoplakia is not that great. And we need very good research in relation to the leukoplakia, especially the case control studies in every aspect. Doing a biopsy is the ultimate thing, because we know the histopathology is the gold standard in identifying the malignant transformation potential. But we cannot do a biopsy for each and every patient due to different reasons. So therefore, these diagnostic aids may help you in certain times. And there are different types of diagnostic aids. Some are very expensive, some are very cheap, and some are very handy, some are very difficult, very complicated. So there are different types of diagnostic aids. Now, you can have the toluidine blue, which is very simple, and you can see in the picture the toluidine blue positivity very nicely, and that will be very helpful in identifying the lesion. That lesion was, unfortunately, I don't have the photograph before the toluidine blue. It was basically uniform lesion. So this tells us where we are going to do the biopsy. And then we have various other light detection systems, salivary diagnostics, many other. Future, we will come up with the molecular diagnostics, which will help us in identifying the cases which will have a difficulty in, we will have a chance of identifying the lesions, whether they have a malignant transformation potential or not. And then there will be the development of telemedicine. It has been there for a while, but now the people are putting much more effort onto that. So with time, it will be easy for the people who are working in the periphery to get the opinion from a specialist in a different place. And on top of that, the artificial intelligence is coming up. I'm part of a group which we are trying to develop artificial intelligence-based tool in identifying the lesions. And I'm sure that is the future, and the people will come up with a better solution with all these things. So that basically concludes my presentation. During this presentation, what I was to highlight is the difficulties that we are facing with the leukoplakias. It's not a very simple, straightforward thing. When you look at the lesion, you may think, okay, this is very easy. But when you look at many lesions, when you try to deal with them, it's not something easy. And here we have a little bit of a time. And most of us are very busy clinicians, and during the normal days, we don't have much of a time to sit to think. But now, with the COVID outbreak, we are having a little bit of a time at our places. So therefore, this is the best time for us to think, plan, and come up with good ideas, suggestions for the research. So whenever the things are back to normal, we will be able to go and do some research. And there were a few questions posed to me, and I would like to answer those questions before we conclude.
Thank you very much, sir. And we have a few questions on Q&A session as well as in the chat. Sir, can we start from the Q&A session, please?
Yes, please. Right. Now, the one question is whether the laser can give rise to a malignant transformation. There's no evidence to say that the laser is giving rise to a malignant transformation. It increases the malignant transformation, but definitely not the cryotherapy. Cryotherapy, there's ample evidence to say the cryotherapy increases the chance of malignant, it increases the malignant transformation rate. With the laser, no, you can use the laser, whatever the type that you are using with the laser. So there's no reason for us not to use the laser. But only disadvantage, especially if you are using the burning mode, evaporations, then there's no way that you can identify whether this is a case of high risk lesion or the low risk lesion. And sometimes the patient may have a high risk lesion and you evaporate it and the patient may get a malignancy, and we may think, okay, my laser has given rise to the malignancy, which is not. So that is the disadvantage with the laser. Otherwise, we can recommend laser like the scalpel surgeries.
So we have question from Dr. Rohit Gadda. Sir, do you recommend biopsy for all tobacco-associated lesions?
No, because when we are considering a biopsy, we have to consider many factors. So therefore, doing a biopsy for each and every patient who is having a tobacco-associated lesion is not recommended. Now, for example, if you have something like a leukodema, or if you're having something like a smoker's palate, they are tobacco-related. But there's no indication, there's no reason for us to go and do a biopsy. They are basically a clinical diagnosis. But saying so, even for a leukodema or even for a smoker's palate, whenever the clinical doubt comes in, we have to go and do a biopsy. So if I say do a biopsy for each and every patient, that is too radical. So you have to use our clinical decision. Even for a leukoplakia, we don't recommend biopsies for each and every case. Very small lesions in a place where there's not much of a malignant transformation potential like buccal mucosa, some people, they don't recommend a biopsy. Now, for example, even our guidelines, Sri Lankan guidelines, we don't recommend a biopsy for those lesions. But on the other hand, there's argument going on. Even a smaller lesion can transform into a malignancy, and we have giving a pseudo assurance, and we are following them up, so the patient may lose to follow up. So some people argue each and every patient you have to do a biopsy. But right now, I'm in the balance. So you have to use your clinical decision. Whenever there's a doubt, you go for a biopsy. Otherwise, we can wait and see. But following them up is very important.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. We have another question from Dr. Rabli Nagi. How much antioxidants retinoid therapy is useful in treatment of the lesion? Is recent photodynamic therapy useful in treating resistant and recurrent cases?
All these are very helpful. Antioxidant therapy, retinoid therapy, as well as photodynamic therapy, all these are very helpful in reducing the malignant transformation potential. But please take this point, none of them will take it zero. So therefore, we have to follow them up. And each and every modality, there are advantages as well as disadvantages. Now, for example, if you take retinoids, and that can give rise to some bad burning. And a lot of people, they don't want to use it. So therefore, we may not be able to use it. Whereas the photodynamic therapy, do we have the photodynamic therapy in each and every center? Yes, some centers they have, but most of the centers, they don't have the luxury. But again, if you use the scalpel surgery, if you use the no surgery, still the results may be the same, or it may be different from one to the other. So there is no hard and fast treatment option yet. And it varies, the treatment modalities varies from place to place. It varies from the clinician to clinician. It varies from person to person. It varies from different reasons. So that is the problem that we have. But all these are very helpful. The most important thing, Whatever the treatment modality you use, considering the patient and other factors, we need to follow these people up. Just because you treat it one modality, whatever the modality is, you will not have absolute zero when it comes to the malignant transformation potential. Still, it can occur.
Okay, so we have another question from Dr. Anushan Jayasinghe. What is the recommended guideline for incisional biopsy for leukoplakia? Always multiple biopsies or single biopsy is enough? What is the objective guideline in taking representative sample?
If you go now, right now, what we have is the guideline produced by the National Cancer Control Program for Sri Lanka. And in the National Cancer Control Program, we have identified the cases where we have to do a biopsy, and then we have cases where we have identified not to do a biopsy. Smaller lesions present in the buccal mucosa for a shorter duration, we don't recommend, in this guideline, we don't recommend the biopsy. Whereas the larger lesions, it's recommended to do a biopsy. But again, the question comes, when we recommend a biopsy, are we recommending a single biopsy or a multiple biopsies? That is in the hand of the clinician. If the clinician thinks, okay, we need more than one biopsy, it's up to the clinician to decide whether you are going to do the single biopsy or a multiple biopsies. Ideally speaking, you have to take the entire lesion out, do the serial biopsies, then only you can be 100% sure this patient is not carrying a risk of malignant transformation. Otherwise, just by doing a single biopsy, just by doing 2 biopsies, 3 biopsies, still there's a possibility that we will missing some point. Now, for example, if you go to the UK, not UK, some of the Scandinavian countries, they will not allow you to do a frozen biopsy, frozen section for the research purpose. Now, most of the other countries, if you are going to go for a research, when it comes to leukoplakia, you can take a biopsy, one incisional biopsy for the routine H&E, which is for the diagnosis, and you can take a separate part and use that part for your studies. But in most of the Scandinavian countries, they will not allow that. Because what they say is, okay, you use one part for the diagnosis, the other part that you are going to use for your study may contain the malignancy or the difficulty part. So therefore, they will not allow you to do it. For them, you have to take the entire lesion out. But on the other hand, the Scandinavian countries, the oral leukoplakia is not a major problem. We are talking about few cases a year. In our case, we are talking about a lot. India, Sri Lanka, we have larger number. So taking multiple biopsies, doing the excision all the time, it may be difficult. So I will say, whether you are going to do a multiple biopsies, an exact position, you have to use your clinical decision. Plus, I always use some other adjunct. Most of the time we use the toluidine blue, and sometimes I use the Wellscope. And if you don't have the Wellscope, the toluidine blue very simple. So use the toluidine blue. It will help with your decision-making process.
Okay, so we have another question from an anonymous attendee. Sir, what is the recommended antifungal treatment if we suspect oral leukoplakia superinfected with Candida?
You can use either topical application or the systemic application, depending on how large the lesion is, how proliferative the lesion is. And most of the time, when the lesion is proliferate, when the lesion is verrucous type, or when the lesion is present in the posterior area, or when the lesion is all over the mouth, topical applications are not practical. It is very difficult for the person to apply it very well. In those circumstances, systemic antifungals, the fluconazole will be the ideal, provided the patient is not having the medical contraindication for the treatment, especially like the liver pathologies. I personally prefer to use the fluconazole, the systemic antifungal, because that will give you a 100% accurate picture rather than topical. We are not very sure whether this is simply because of the poor application of the drug, or whether it is the real non response to the treatment.
Okay, so we have another question from Dr. Dr. Aravind Konidena. Nice presentation, Dr. Jayasinghe. Can you enlighten us on the management aspects for low grade and high grade dysplasia?
Right. Now, this is again a large area, but I will try to summarize it for a shorter thing. And if it's necessary, we will be able to have another session on the management of leukoplakias. Now, generally, the management of high-grade leukoplakias, or if the patient is having severe epithelial dysplasias, high-risk dysplasias, is traditionally by surgery, by removing the lesion, either using the scalpel or using the laser. But again, we have to remember, just because we remove the lesion completely does not necessarily mean there's no malignant transformation. So the habit intervention, careful follow-up are necessary. The question comes when you are trying to remove it with the scalpel or with the laser, are we going to take a margin? And if you are going to take a margin, what is the margin? Whether it is 1 millimeter, 2 millimeter, 3 millimeter, there's no acceptable level, acceptance level. When it comes to the cancer, we know what is the margin is. It is with evidence, people has proven, okay, this is the best margin that you can have. But when it comes to the leukoplakia, there's no such agreement. So the different people are using the different things. And the other thing, even if you take it out completely, even if the patient is not going to get the malignant transformation from that particular place, the patient may develop a malignancy from some other place. So therefore, careful follow-up is necessary. So if the patient is high grade, my option, the general agreement is to do it with the surgery. But there are cases where the patient has not undergone a surgery due to medical reason, and after a while the lesion has completely disappeared simply because the patient has given up the habit. So that is there. And when the patient is having a low grade lesions, then we have multiple options. We can have surgical options, we can have the non-surgical options. Nowadays, we prefer non-surgical options over surgical options when the patient is having a low grade lesion. And some people just wait and see. If the patient is having mild epithelial dysplasia, mild to moderate epithelial dysplasia, and you just wait and see. In addition to the habit intervention and nutritional supplement, this and that, you don't do any intervention. Whereas some other time, you do the surgical intervention. So that's how we basically manage it. If it is high grade, surgical. If it's low grade, non-surgical.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Now we have many questions on follow-up guidelines. So we have actually 7 or 8 questions on follow-up guidelines. Could you please summarize the follow-up and answer all the questions in summary format,
Right.
please?
Again, there are no hard and fast rules when it comes to the follow-up guideline. Follow-up interval, whether it is 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, there is no hard and fast agreement. But whenever we are going to follow up the patient, we have to consider multiple factors. Number one, the feasibility. You can, by theory, you can say, okay, follow up the patient every month. But how practical that is from your point, as well as from the patient's point of view. And if you have a very close follow-up intervals, after 2-3 visits, the patient fed up and the patient gives up. Because every majority of the patients, what we are going to say, okay, we are going to say them, good, there's nothing inside your mouth, there's no suspicious lesions, so come in a 1 month's time. And other than a very smaller portion of people, that is what we are going to say. So once the patient hears this story 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, they simply fed up and they give it up. On the other hand, there's a cost involved and there's a time involved, and so many other factors from the patient's point of view, so they will not be able to come up. On the other hand, it will be too much of work from you as well. And when these people keep attending continuously, it will not be possible for us to manage the patients in the clinic. We have to do other work as well. So therefore, the reasonable time frame will be 3 months intervals. And again, the question comes, how long you are going to follow these patients up? Is it 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Again, there's no agreement onto that. My belief, you have to follow them up forever, because these people may develop a malignancy later on. But what the study says, the malignant transformations usually they appear within first few years. So the first few years, first 3 years are the critical time period. So if there's no malignant transformation during the first 3 years, then the chances are getting less and less. So if you want, you can increase the follow-up intervals after the first 3 years.
Okay, thank you very much again, sir. So can we have 2 more questions?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we have a question from Dr. Dylan Fernando. If the lesion is smaller, is it recommended to do complete excision, or is there any guidance?
If the lesion is small, the chance of it to transform into the malignancy is less. But still, the lesion still can transform into a malignancy. And so therefore, one can argue, why don't we take it out? But just because you take it out will not prevent the malignant transformation 100%. The issue with the complete removal is the patient will get a pseudo assurance. Now my lesion has been taken out completely, so therefore I don't need to come back again. I can continue with my habits. So that is one of the problems that we are facing with. But if you go with the Sri Lankan guidelines, very small lesions, we don't have to take them out. So therefore, if you are going to take it out, it is your clinical decision. These guidelines are guidelines that is there for us to help. That is not applicable for each and every patient in the same way. It's up to the clinician to decide. Now, for example, if the patient, you are sure that this patient is not going to come for the follow-ups, this patient, okay, if the patient is going abroad, something like that, then you can consider taking it out. But a person who is going to come to you, a person who is afraid of surgical interventions, you can follow them up.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. The last question, this is from Dr. Aravinda Konidena. So do you recommend using any staging for leukoplakia?
From my personal point of view, it's too troublesome and it's very difficult to practice. We don't have agreed staging mechanism, staging protocol yet. So therefore, whatever we have developed is very difficult to do it in the clinic. And at the end of the day, what are we going to achieve by doing it? So that is the question we have to answer. Will it help us in our management? Will it help us in identifying the malignant transformation? So the moment we come up with some type of a staging system which will answer these 2 questions, yes, at that point we may have to use it. Otherwise, the staging system that we are having right now is more or less academic and research oriented, not really a clinical practical oriented.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. So that brings up to the end of our webinar series. First of the series of webinars organized by Faculty of Dental Sciences. So that remarks conclusion, and let me thank Professor Ruan Jayasinghe for the wonderful presentation and your contribution to the series of webinars. So thank you very much, sir. Thanks a lot. And thank you very much, everyone, for staying connected, and hope you had a fruitful session. This is a kind reminder before we wind up. This webinar will follow up with an email, and please follow the link to submit your feedback for further improvements. So we'll be conducting as a series of webinars every Tuesday and every Friday at 8 p.m. as usual. So the next webinar will be on management of cleft lip and palate. Hope you would register and join with us. Once again, sir, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Sumit. And we would like to have their ideas, suggestions with the questionnaire that the Sumudu is going to post, because that will help us to plan things for the future. And if you can suggest some topics for us to include, then we can consider including those topics as well. It's not only on oral medicine, whatever the area, we will be able to consider them and get the people organized to do it for you all. Thank you very much. And unfortunately, I can't see the people who has participated, but thank you everyone for staying for that long. Thank you again.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.